Fred Baker is an instructional design PhD student in the program with me at the University of South Alabama, and he's going to tell us some more about the topology of online learning, of open learning, sorry.
Hey, everybody.
If you would like to get up and get a drink or a snack, you know, you can, the food is right there, so please help yourself.
Which one of these is mine? There you go. Yeah, absolutely. It's real informal. And if I say something in here that you don't know or aren't sure about, stop me. We've got nothing but time, and so this is all
Time and money.
Time and money. Time and money. So, two things I want to kind of preface. I tend to call it open education. It's kind of a broader term, but open learning occurs kind of inside of open education. So open education, to me, is about the design and everything that goes into the classroom and the instruction and the students. So it's maybe more holistic than just open learning, but open learning is heavily involved in it. The other thing is there was a lot of discussion about traditional, about the online classes, the traditional model being moved to an online setting, and there's some issues with that as far as, I know sometimes I've taken them and I feel like I'm talking into a tin can, or there's not that connection. And so the thing to keep in mind about open education is that it's kind of an experiment in pedagogy and teaching. So it's an attempt to try and do the best we can to teach online, and hopefully cure some of that tin canniness and make connections with people and learn how to do that using technology through the internet, and interact with other people, because we don't have the opportunity with online learning to get together and have those informal discussions after class. And so just keep those things in mind. But hopefully what I'm going to give you is a practical way to think about open education and a way to kind of differentiate different types of openness and think about, let me see if I'm doing this right. Think about different types of classes. So we'll go over a definition just of openness in general, and then open learning. We'll look at some of the elements of open learning environments that I think are pretty universal, although to different degrees. And then there's different types of openness. And then this, I call them open educational designs, but what that is there are several different types of open education courses, and that's kind of an overarching term to discuss all of those. So let's see. Just define openness. One of the biggest issues that we see in open education is that there's not really a consistent definition of openness. In fact, we think of it as new, but there was a big open education movement in the 60s and 70s that worked on communication and community building and agency with the learners. And I think that this open education movement that we're seeing now is the same exact movement that's seen a resurgence, given an analog to digital transition. So we're not looking at physical classrooms anymore. We're not looking at specific in physical assignments so much as we're looking at an online environment where we can connect with other people. But the same core elements seem to apply from that movement and this movement. So openness is really context dependent. It changes a lot. It's hard to think about, and there's lots of subtle differences between the areas, so hopefully we're going to clear that up, at least to some degree. But the biggest thing is that it's identifiable through its major characteristics, and we'll look at that in a second. But openness is a continuous construct, and what I mean by that is a classroom or a project can be a little bit open, or a lot open, or somewhat open, like a door, rather than all on and all off. So some of these classrooms that we'll discuss, some of these environments are more open than others. And just kind of keep in mind that there's differences between them. Is that coming there? So some of the general tenets and core ideas of openness that you'll find in pretty much any open endeavor is transparency. And what that means is that in a classroom environment that you want to be everything that you're doing, have it very visible. So your syllabus, your grading procedures, where you're getting your resources from, the type of things that are influencing your decision, and a lot of that's already present in a traditional classroom. We see a lot of access to the materials. One of the things that you'll notice is a reduction of barriers, and what that means is that you want to open it up so that people can, from outside of the environment, can come in, so that you can access research and resources from outside of the traditional walls of your classroom. And we see that. I mean, the classroom is a lot more open than it was 15 or 20 years ago before the internet really hit. We can access all types of resources on the web. The thing that open education tends to push is the idea that you can bring people who aren't necessarily registered with the university or involved in the class and have them participate in the class. So you can make connections outside of class, have people who aren't necessarily in the same grounding as the students come into a class. Universal rights and ownership, there's freedom of information. It's the idea that there's open access and closed access research. Some of it's freely available and freely accessible, and some of it's not. That kind of gets to the idea that students should have some ownership over their own learning, and they should be able to, not everything, but have access and free use of the materials. A lot of times you'll see teachers come up with this really great model and they teach you to think about it, and it says copyright, and that's great, but then you're not allowed to copy it or take it with you, and that means that you can't apply it to other situations later. It's not really a huge issue now that, I guess now that technology's enabled sharing the way it has, but I know in the past I've seen some really interesting things that are hard to go reapply, but then you come into issues with credit and who's getting credit and attribution for their work, and so there's new ways of dealing with that, and they're not perfect, but they're working on it. Access to materials, that kind of goes along with the same idea, and the ability to leave or fork. So open education has an influence, although it's not grounded in the open source software movement. And the idea behind the open source software movement is that you have transparency in the way that you build software. So software is written in human language, and then it goes through a compiler, a software program, and then which converts that human language into machine language. The machine then knows how to run Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or whatever the software is. So an open source program is going to let anybody have access to that human language, so that if they know what they're doing, they can edit it, change it, make changes to the software program. The idea, how that translates into open access, you should be able to leave. Yes?
And additionally, with this concept of open software open source software you're talking about is, if you make changes to the software, everything goes back into the pot, and other people can make changes to what you're doing. So open source software is a good model for open learning, but I don't think that they're...
No, absolutely. And that's got to do with licensing. It depends on, there's something called the Creative Commons licenses, and that has to do, you provide, as the creator of the content, you provide permissions for your creations up front. So that's where I was kind of hinted at attribution of your work earlier. Some people write books and then they release that under a Creative Commons license, and they're different. So some people can make any kind of modifications and only have to give attribution to the author. Other circumstances, they can change the work, but then they have to release it under the same or a similar license so that other people can use that work.
Are you talking about like Wikipedia?
Wikipedia is an example of it, yeah. So anybody can access and edit Wikipedia, and then that content is licensed under a Creative Commons license. So that means that whatever I create, somebody else can go change. And the different licenses have different permissions. But Wikipedia is a great example of an open educational resource.
Flickr is a really good example of like a graphic sort of open content. So different people will post, photographs or digital content, and then they'll give you permission. You can reuse this, but you've got to to me, or you can reuse this. You can change it, do whatever you want, or it's just for educational purposes. I mean, really, it runs the gamut.
So you snap a picture of a statue in the garden, and I put it on Flickr, and then somebody else can come back and put that in their presentation and just link to it. In fact, I've got a few Flickr images in here with links to it. Yes, sir.
What you're saying, ability to leave a fork, or what you're just saying is not the fact that you can go in and change somebody's work. You can use it.
Well, ability to
You
leave.
can use it for your own, you can post it, but you can use it for your own benefit.
Right. Well, I think I probably got off topic with the Creative Commons licensing, the intellectual property and copyleft. There's this huge debate, field of study going on right now where they specifically focus on that, being what's okay for you to modify somebody else's work. Is it not okay? So the ability to leave and fork is more to the point that if I'm participating in an open education classroom, I don't have to stay there. I can leave at any time. I can access any material I want. I can go into any situation. I'm in control of my presence in that.
Oh, I understood what I was thinking, but I guess I misunderstood. What I was thinking you were saying is somebody can go in and change the actual work that's in there that somebody else is gonna see, and nobody's gonna say, hey, whether this is right or wrong.
Well,
Accurate or not.
and absolutely, that's that happens. That's not maybe to the way that there are some checks, like Wikipedia, for example, isn't anybody can go in there and edit the content. I can go on right now and change a page on Open Education and make it say I started the whole thing, but people are going to see that and they're going to question it, and I might not have a resource, and so there are quality checks in place. It's under public scrutiny too, but you get back to the issue of somebody has to catch it and somebody has to know better. That kind of gets into the idea of sharing, because you take in information and access also. You take in information that people have licensed so that everybody's able to use it. And I wish I had a slide on the Creative Commons licenses, but traditional copyright, for instance, Mickey Mouse, the character Mickey Mouse is still copyright, and it has been for 90 years. I can't just go draw Mickey Mouse. The problem with that is that there's issues where it doesn't fall into the public domain because they changed the copyright laws, and so Walt Disney himself kind of drew a lot on public domain works in order to create a lot of the cartoons he did, and there's a ton of other examples where creativity builds on the shoulders of things that are in the past, but the public domain's not really, the public domain system isn't really, it's been changed so that it's hard to access materials that should be in the public domain, and so there's the pool of what you're allowed to build on is really shrunk. So Creative Commons licensing is a way to kind of combat that. If I write a book and it's my own personal work and I say, I don't mind if people use this, then I've got some options of how I release that.
Yeah.
So that's where
But I wouldn't think anybody could change it.
Well, it depends on how you release it. And the 6 licenses are Creative Commons attribution only. So you can do anything you want. You can bundle it up and sell it as long as you put Fred Baker wrote the original.
Oh.
There's a non-commercial version. So you could bundle it up and use it for education, modify it however you want it, but not use it for commercial purposes. There's a share alike. So if you modify the work, you have to release your modification under a license so that other people can use it. And there's a non-commercial version of that. And there is a license that, not a commercial and a non-commercial version where you're not allowed to change it. You can freely distribute it, but you're not allowed to modify it at all. So,
So in an information society, you can see that there's a lot of argument about who owns information.
Right. And who can modify it.
That's really what I think the big deal of what Fred and all of us are talking about is when someone creates an online class or does a presentation, which are informational presentations like this, I could find 10,000 presentations on open learning on the internet, but I would be mistaken. I don't own that. I don't own the work. So I couldn't just present it to you as if I had created it. I mean, I would either have to cite it, but even just citing it to me is not enough, because by presenting it as if it were my own, I'm adopting or keeping some of the intellectual property as my own. I'm presenting the intellectual property as my own. And so, when you start opening education, then you have to think about all of the intellectual property rights.
And part of what you're getting at, Angela, is the the traditional way that we locked things away, that we protected our interest and protected our copyright, was to have control over it. You couldn't, it was hard to copy a tape, or it was hard to, you couldn't mass produce and mass distribute a CD, or a PowerPoint or a presentation or a book. It was always, I have one book, I might be able to photocopy it, but that's horrible, I'm not going to do it 1,000 times, I might do it twice. And so there's a limited range of abuse of intellectual property, but now I can scan a book and load it online and distribute it to 10 million people, and it costs me almost nothing other than a few hours of time. So with that kind of power, it's hard to hold on to your intellectual property and say, I want to share this and I want you to have access to it, but I don't want you to abuse it, because you're dealing with a range of people. And so these Creative Commons licenses and things, that's kind of an approach to deal with that. And just like Angela was saying, open education is an answer to how do we share, how do we make resources that are available for other people to use without sacrificing quality and letting anybody just modify it however they feel.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
When these students go into these online classes,
Mhm.
what do they actually see on their computers? Is somebody standing up presenting
Sure.
information, or is it just a whole bunch of words?
Yeah, well, actually, I've got there's three major types, and that's the open educational designs, and I'll discuss a little bit about that in just a few minutes.
And you'll see some samples in some
Sure.
of the other presentations.
And
We're going to get to the actual nitty-gritty.
I've got a lot of links also I'll share with you so that you can
I
go.
have another question.
Sure.
too. This has nothing to do with the open learning, but my husband and I have gotten involved with genealogy,
Mhm.
and they're really pushing for people to go on Facebook to interact and get your background through this. Is that somewhat the same thing, you sharing from other people that are doing that?
I mean, I think it's works off of similar ideas, because with digital technology being what it is and the internet being so prevalent and everybody being on Facebook and Twitter and having access on your phone, you've got what they call it a digital identity. So you've got a presence online, and so things that traditionally would be held private, your address, your phone number, how much money you make per year, I mean, those things are most likely available on the internet, which is, for better or for worse, is what it is. But, you know, Facebook enables you to share things like what you had for breakfast, and it also pushes where you tweeted from. It would be really easy to go on and access different types of information. So maybe that's why they're pushing the genealogy social media element, because people share all this information regardless of whether it's good or not.
Yeah, and I mean, I would say that, yeah, it is sort of creating a learning community, because within Facebook or within Twitter, whatever you want, you can create a group that only particular people have access to. And so if you created a genealogy group, you could post in that group, and so you could, let's say you were looking for, a family member or a copy of the 1907 or 1910 census, right? And you post in there that you're looking for it. Somebody from Michigan could have a copy of that 1910 census. And so you are creating a learning community within a social network. Does that make sense?
But why would that person in Michigan that I don't know be looking?
Because they're in the genealogy group with you. They also have an interest in genealogy.
You share an interest
Yeah, you share
across the
interests
group.
together, and you're both in that group. And so it's kind of like a pay it forward, pay it back. I'm going to help you out in the hope that one day you'll help me out, kind of thing.
And that's probably a better angle than what I was getting at.
Well, alternately, my first cousin is a genealogist, self-taught genealogist, and so she's doing the family tree on my father's side and posting lots of pictures, and in many of those pictures, we know who the people are. But in some of the pictures, we don't know who they are. So she puts them online and says, hey, who knows? Now I told you my whole family is online. And so they posted one picture and said it was my mother. And I said, that is not my mother. And so brought it to my parents' house, pulled up the picture. I said, that's not you, is it, Mom? And she said, no, that's not, that's my cousin or second cousin, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, there
And
are-
that was at a birthday party, and this was, and she knew everything. She said, I was at that party, but that is not me. And so it cleared it up.
Yeah, there's a lot of archival institutions that are doing that too, like they're asking for public help in identifying places, people. So like the University of Michigan, I know, does it for sure. They put up digitized photographs, digitized content, and they say, who are these people? If you know, please tell me. And then, of course, they'll do fact-checking to make sure that they're actually who they are. But it's asking the social public.
And what you're getting at is, it's called crowdsourcing. And there's an Encyclopedia of Life where they find some new species of insect and post it, and people interested in that topic go and say, oh, well, it's got 8 legs, it's a spider, or whatever they classify it. And they found a few new species that way, but they're trying to catalog life on Earth. There's video games where they're trying to fold protein strands in different ways to make new medications, and so they turn it into a game. They release it for the public to access, and people crowdsource new protein strands that computers can't generate because they're not good at that pattern recognition. And then scientists take that and they research it in the lab, and sometimes it's beneficial and sometimes it's not. But crowdsourcing is the idea that you use human power combined with computer power to do things that neither one of them could really do well on our own. So we can't access, and drove through just thousands and thousands of irrelevant data to find out what's relevant, but computers are really good at that. But then computers can't look at a picture and identify distinguishing characteristics about that. So open learning itself, and that's speaking of Flickr. This is maybe actually that's not a Flickr image, but I just got that one off Google. But there are Flickr images in here. So open learning is it's digitally enabled, like we were talking about. Web 2.0. Web 1.0 is I have a link. You can access the link. You see what I say. You see what I posted on the internet. Web 2.0, it's interactive. I can post links, you can post links, we can share, I can modify. So it's a read-write web is one thing that they call it. And instead of just a read-only web, you've now got the power to create and share. And so social media tools, like we'll look at some today, and creative tools come into play with that. And there's something PLE, you'll see that. And what I mean by that is a personal learning environment. And if you think about that as your digital platform, so a lot of students or learners or people in general will have a whole range of Twitter, Facebook, blog maybe that they write on, different other people's blogs that they may pull information from. Yeah, exactly. And so these are all the collection of that is a personal learning environment. And the other people involved on the other sides of those networks are networked individuals. So you might see PLN, it's a personal learning network. They're talking about the people that are arrayed around your personal learning environment. So if you may see that, but and I think I talk about it a little bit, but that's basically what it means. It's your digital web, if you think about it like that. So through your PLE, your personal learning environment, you take in information from all over the place, and then you'll kind of digest it. And a lot of times they'll share it. You'll generate some new perspective and share it on a blog or through a YouTube video or through a tweet even sometimes for other people to look at and consider and enjoy. So open learning is also self-directed, and that's the thing we were getting at. You're not required to be there. You're able to leave, but you also, more than that, to some degree, set your own goals in certain environments. You set your own content. You access the content at in your own sequence. Different environments enable that to different degrees, and we'll look at that in a minute. But the biggest thing is that in a lot of open education, you engage the information where you're interested. So you're not required to go, like in a higher ed institution, you've got to take Math 101, and a lot of people don't like it, but that's the game. In an open education environment, you're not made to. There's no accreditation, there's no degree, and we'll talk about that too, but you're not forced to take something you don't want. So you can go access information that you're interested in through open education. So I mentioned a minute ago, they're not accredited, there's no real degrees. There are certificates, there are something called open badges, which I'll talk about in a second. There's ways to kind of certify that you went through the course and you did the things involved, but an open education degree is not equivalent with like the University of South Alabama granting you a degree. Some people will argue that it's a similar construct because the university is vouching that you have done these things and met these requirements and therefore you earned the degree. And they claim that the open learning environment is capable of doing the same thing, and that may or may not be true, but that's another huge debate. But they do carry some assessment and some certification out. These open badges are basically, they're just digital certificates that you go through a class that I teach, and then I say they've made the grade, they've done the assignments, here's an open badge for meeting these accomplishments. And it's posted. The good thing about open work is that it's normally cataloged, so they can go back and see your performance or your blog, see the requirements for that badge, and then somebody can go and investigate that if they have any questions about it. There's also some peer grading assessment experiments. Again, open learning, open education is a big experiment, and there's standardized multiple choice questions that computers are really good at grading, but how do you grade a written essay? How do you grade an article that somebody's written? A computer's not good at doing that, and so they're running into issues when you're trying to teach 500,000 people in one class. How do you grade an essay? So you may have heard there was an attempt to get the students to match the instructor's grading on an essay, and then it was presumed that because you can match that instructor's grading that you are qualified to grade your peers' work. There was some issues with that. There was a lot of issues with plagiarism and claims of that, and that gets into the issues of assessment. I can't guarantee that it's you sitting there doing the work. I can't guarantee that what you did was what I found, and so that's where the accreditation comes in and the concerns over degrees. But just to kind of touch on that, I really like this quote. It's from Carl Rogers, who's a big psychology educator. But it's the idea that we can't teach another person directly. We can only facilitate their learning, his or her learning. So the idea there is that, in any situation, the learner has a lot of responsibility. As an instructional designer, we definitely can do a lot for it. I make a comparison that, I can set you up an appointment at the gym, get you a good breakfast, make sure you've got water, put you on the treadmill, make sure that your schedule's clear, but you still have to run. You're the one that has to do it. And so you can design an instructional environment that does everything short of actually making them learn. But it's definitely something to consider and think about how it carries through this. Again, it's done for the sake of learning, so you're not forced to be there. So there's a lot of internal, intrinsic motivation. I want to learn. I want to be here. And some of the more memorable stories that you hear is the Udacity course or the Stanford Artificial Intelligence course. You may have heard about it. There's a professor, Sebastian Thrun from Stanford. He decided to open up his course, his artificial intelligence course, and I think 160,000 people signed up for it. About 25,000 ended up staying through the whole thing, and that tends to happen a lot. There's a lot of attrition in open education, but nobody's forcing anybody to be there. So the memorable stories from that, though, and the reason that I think it touched him so much that he wanted to go and open Udacity, which we'll learn about in a few minutes, is that there were people going through war zones to turn in their homework because the access to the internet was across town, and they're in the middle of a war zone. Or there was he got a letter that he talked about from a single mother who had, I think, 4 children and was just stressed out and almost gave up, but decided that this was something that she was going to do for herself, and she had committed to it, and so she carried through it. And I think it's hard for anybody, especially educators who, we're to some degree, our jobs are philanthropic. We want to help people. It's hard for people to hear that kind of stuff and know that you've changed somebody's life and given them access to education or learning that they could never otherwise hope to get, and then ignore that. So that's one of the biggest motivations for open education. Some of the important elements for it are there's connections among people, social connections, technology, communities of practice, authentic practice, which is the idea that you're doing something meaningful and relevant. You're not just writing a book report, or not that a book report is irrelevant, but you're doing maybe a project that can actually help society in some way, or a lot of times they'll write a book or make an open educational resource to share with people. And then there's networking involved. So just kind of push through this. There's three primary elements to courses that I wanted to kind of go through, and there are ways that they're different in open education versus traditional education classes. But in its strictest sense, like a traditional education class is a one-to-many environment. So there's a teacher and they're talking to 10, 20, 30, 70 students, 500 students. There might be a textbook, there might be some resources, but it's generally one-to-many. Excuse me. An open learning environment, OLE, is just an open learning environment, or an OED. Lots of acronyms in open education. But they use one-to-many, but they also use many-to-many. There's peer groups. There's many diffuse of the learning community that has several hundred or 1,000 people involved, and there's new people coming in might act together to help. So there's definitely different types of connections that are more prominent and common in open education. And the ways to look at this are the environment, the instructor, and the learners. They each take on different roles in an open environment than they maybe do in traditional environments. Again, I said the 1960s and 70s open education movement is I think the same. And so I've been digging through the literature and the research from the 70s, and there's a book called The Philosophy of Open Education that this comes out of, and a few other really pivotal things come out of. But Tunnell, I think I'm saying that right, maybe it's Tunnell, came up with these four things to talk about as far as these are the characteristics that are involved in an open educational environment. And what he was talking about was a physical environment, but they still apply. So there's a freedom rule. It's the idea that the learner should have some freedom over what they do. They should have agency and the ability to go in and control their learning, control what they access. The environment rule, so it's important that the environment has a lot of resources, just be rich in resources and opportunity for students to learn, especially in authentic learning. Individual instruction rule is the idea that we should try and personalize learning, which has never been more possible than with technology. But at the same time that you're trying to personalize learning, it's very, very, very essential that you steer people towards worthwhile educational goals. At least from an instructor-led environment, there's a lot to learning, but it's easy to get distracted in some environments, and so instructors have a responsibility to gear people towards educational relevance, something that's worthwhile.
So I think a contrast for an environment for open learning, and maybe you're thinking, oh, well, technology has been facilitating open learning for a long time, because maybe you purchased like a computer-aided instructional program for like language learning,
right,
to learn a skill. You bought the tutorial, and it's on a CD, and you put it in your computer, and you read this, and you read something, and then you answer some questions, and then boom, it moves you to the next chapter. But you're thinking, oh, well, I didn't really get that, but you're forced to move on. So that kind of a program violates learner agency, and
right,
all of these. It's not personalized. It's not intelligent. It's not
right,
intelligent instruction, so that it senses how well you're learning and presents you with maybe another instance in which you could learn more about a particular aspect of what you're learning. So open learning is broader and allows you to really manipulate the entire learning environment as a learner on your own.
absolutely,
For better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean that's a great point. And so learner agency, you have some control over what you do in that environment. You're involved in it personally. It's not some design that's just meant for anybody to come through. It's to some level you interact with that on a personal level with other people, with your content, and then you generate a response and share that with other people, and other people access that. and the resources and the opportunity are going to be different in every environment, but part of that is students, learners bringing that information into the environment. So it's, in a traditional environment, you may have the teacher, the instructor, the educator bringing all the, kind of dictating what resources go into the environment. You're going to use this textbook, you're going to use these articles, and you may or may not have learners bring in articles, but if you do, it's probably not common. But in an open environment, the idea, or ideally, everybody will make a meaningful contribution. So that's when you get into a lot of these social media services that you saw, Delicious and Twitter, where you can social bookmarking, and a lot of these are useful for sharing resources with other people. The individual instruction rule it goes back to that personalized learning, and then just respect. And the movement from the '60s was very, very big on respect. I think they felt there was a lot of issues with traditional schooling at that time regarding respect. I don't know much about that area, but there's definitely a big emphasis on respect in open education, just for everybody. Yes, sir.
You talk about the '60s. Where was this in the '60s? I went to college in the '60s. And I never saw anything like that.
Sure, it's not extremely common in America. It was a lot bigger in England, the UK. It was here though. There was I want to say, and I don't even know where I'm pulling this from, but I want to say there was like 8 to 10% at its peak of open schools. Now that's an analog approach. The idea there was schools without walls might have been an open structure, similar thing. And the idea was that in a physical environment you would put everybody so that they can interact and connect, but then it causes issues because there's noise and chatter. But the idea behind that, making accessibility, reducing barriers, tie into the community, those same core beliefs carry over. And I think they're better executed. Now, I know that movement kind of fell in the late 70s.
Yeah.
Politics experiments, and there's a lot of issues with people claiming that it was everything and it more than it was, and there was conflicting research, and we'll actually look at a little bit of maybe the reasons for that. But I think this is the same movement. I do.
I went to school in high school in open classrooms. You're right, it was noisy, and the environment was open, but the formula for teaching remained in that same structured way. Stop paying attention to that class over there. I'm over here. There was really no sharing going on. So I don't think we executed that open learning environment very well. And pretty soon then the little dividers started showing up, and people were, and then the open classroom then became a cubicle. We had movable walls, so that was still okay. It was open because we could move those walls down if we wanted to and share some stuff.
But they were there.
Where was this, in Louisiana?
This was in Louisiana.
I'm not 100% sure, but I almost want to say that Palmer Pillins was originally like that. I'm not sure though, but I know they had central meeting spaces, and the open plan school might be another name for it. So the instructors, the environment it has different elements, but can compare differently to traditional environments. But the instructor does too. So there's Alec Koros is a guy, and Wendy Drexler also. They're both professors that are interested in open education. And Alec Koros came up with this networked teacher model. And so this is the instructor, and this is their personal learning environment, their PLE. These are the things that they interact with. To share and gather information, digital resources, community, video conferences, social networking services, social bookmarking, photo sharing. And the idea is that they are gathering and sharing information. There's just constant transfer back and forth between the instructor and their personal learning environment, and then they bring the resources from that to bear on their education environment, their classroom where they're teaching. And so these instructors are comparably more up to date. than maybe a traditional educator who is operating on a set of knowledge that they got in the doctoral program they're sharing with through a book. There may be some holes in there, or some things that aren't quite as up to date.
Couldn't you also say that all of those are access points for the students to meet the instructor? Also, as opposed to just the face-to-face access
Yeah,
point.
absolutely.
Now you've got all these dozens
Yes, sir.
of access points.
Is this instructor physically present during the online instruction, or is this a tape thing?
Well, no, this is primarily a traditional, I call it an anchored open course, and so, yeah, they would be just like any other. They would physically run a class that actually.
So it would be at a specific time, you would have to be there at a specific.
Well, no, sir, they,
Well,
you would access the online class, but they would be directly involved in managing and.
no, wait. If I'm gonna go to that computer and I'm gonna look at something, is he gonna be there, am I gonna be there at a specific time? Or is it gonna be such that I can go on anytime and I can see what it is, but I can interact with him through email?
Right, it's gonna be the second one, it's asynchronous is what they call it, so
Thank you.
that's the beauty of online, is, you don't have to meet at Tuesday at 6 o'clock
That's what
anymore,
I
so
thought.
you can definitely access it anytime. And they are there at times, but these absolutely, like you and Angela said, these are access points, so I'm in the environment, I am going through some chapter, I'm having a really rough time with the lecture that he's put up, I don't understand it, I've got a question, it's 3 o'clock on Sunday. I can tweet him, or I can email him, or I can,
Or ask
catch him
another
on
student.
Facebook, or I can ask another student, which is more likely
Yep.
to get me an answer quicker, because now I've got 30 people to ask instead of one. And that's what happens, is I say, oh, I'm really stumped on, problem number 3, and I tweet to my personal learning network, my friends, and they, in the class, say, oh, I saw this other thing that will probably help you with that. And so the idea there is that two people have connected and come together.
Can I mention one thing about that? I was in the service, I was over in Germany, and I went on the computer and I joined this little group called the Rothwestern Group. And I'm gonna tell you, when you do something like that, I get 100 emails every day. It's impossible for me to look at them.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, is that what this is gonna?
It's, there's been a lot of discussion of information overload. You definitely, anybody who's technologically adept will tell you that you have to be merciless in culling the information that comes at you and be very selective. But the beauty of a situation like this is that it's not just the educator who's trying to help. So you might have 30 students, or you might have 3,000. But there's not one teacher versus 3,000 students. There's 3,000 students and one teacher working together to help each other out.
No, I can understand that, but I can't see 3,000 messages.
No, but the message is, the way Twitter works and some other things is, you can, there's things called hashtags, which I'm sure they'll talk about later, but I can post and use this hashtag, it's a £sign with a word, so pound open education. I can post a question, and each open class generally has a Twitter hashtag that they use. So you'll post a question to that Twitter hashtag or a video or resource. And other people who you may not even know that also follow that hashtag can help you. So if you think about it like a sheet, it's a blanket, and then that hashtag, I don't know most of these people, but it's like pinching a piece of the blanket up, and everybody else who's pinched that same piece can access it. So then you make another connection, you pinch another piece, and this is Facebook, and now you've got Facebook and Twitter, and everybody interested in either one of those are now accessing. There's a ton of services like that, Digo, social bookmarking. So yeah, you'll see a lot of messages, but you'll get really good at finding out what's relevant, what's not, cutting out.
Yeah,
Well, I remember these are people that are already doing this anyway, a
Yeah.
lot of the population.
Absolutely.
I mean, they're already tweeting, they're already following
Yeah.
Lady Gaga, so they're used to the concept of a hashtag.
Right.
And just because you have 10,000 messages in your Twitter stream doesn't mean those are 10,000 unique messages.
That's true
You know, there's that old joke that there are only 10 jokes on the internet.
Or that they
Just
apply to
change
you.
The dog breed and the gender, and it's the same thing over and over again. So for instance, email or a Twitter stream, if I delete all of my emails, chances are someone's eventually going to say again, re-say what I've already deleted.
I understand
So,
that also,
yeah.
that also happens.
Right.
We have not only an abundance, but maybe an exaggeration and reiteration of information.
Right. Which in some ways is good though, because if you don't have to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning to see that message, you can go back later, and there's the statistical probability of you seeing the same thing later is
Oh, yeah.
it's really good.
Yeah, I get the same joke 15 times.
Yeah.
See, same thing, so dip your cup in the information stream and drink what you can, and then you move on.
Information fire hydrant.
Fire hydrant,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a stream, it's a fire.
It's a fire hydrant.
You're absolutely right.
So the third element is the learners. And I know I probably should be pushing through. So they're often open scholars, and open scholars have access to a personal learning environment. That's kind of one of the things that we've been talking about. And they access other students, and they access information and content. And so they have a distributed online presence, and that's back to the personal learning environment. That just means that you've got a Twitter account and a Facebook account and maybe a blog, and you have several different accounts online that you access and use. So your presence is distributed, your web presence is distributed. And that's one of the things that Angela was talking about, is that Facebook is trying to get you to reduce your digital presence so that Facebook carries most of your digital presence. You don't need to have a Twitter account and to this and to that because you've got Facebook. Yahoo does the same thing. They want you to go to Yahoo page and have access to the web, to news, to groups, to messages, to music, to finance, to stock, so that you don't have to go to 100 different web pages and access those things. Also, a central place to share. Open scholars will have, they'll often, like I said, pull in information and then digest it and then write out a blog or make a movie. They usually have one primary channel that they'll share with other people on, and the network of peers. So open scholarship, those learners are generally interested in technology and openness and the philosophy behind it. And so there's a lot of like informal dissemination, informal distribution of information, and they tend to go towards open publishing outlets and when they are being scholarly, but they don't always have to be scholars. And this is the important part, is there's a lot of people that are just, parents, professionals, there's older, there's younger, there's middle-aged, there's people from a variety of interests and backgrounds and skill levels and degree levels and that are just interested in learning. So when they put up a class about learning how to build a web search engine or how to do digital photography, there's a whole array of people that are going to that. I was interested in the artificial intelligence class, even though I'm sure there was so much math in there I'd have never been able to keep up. But had I had the time, I still would have tried to go through that type of class just to see what it was like. And so it's interesting because an open learning environment brings together people who may never otherwise access that type of information. And what's interesting about that, you may think of a business example when they used to have silos, and the marketing department would package up the tube and ship it to to the finance, and they would ship it to the management, and they would ship it back. It wasn't as efficient. So when they brought out dynamic teams that could bring all these different perspectives to bear on an issue, they came up with better products that were faster and cheaper. And so just speculative on a whole, I think that society having access to things that they wouldn't normally have access to is interesting because it brings perspectives and thoughts that wouldn't otherwise necessarily happen to bear on a problem, like the crowdsourcing examples we were talking about earlier. Had somebody not said, I wonder if we can have the public access this, we probably wouldn't have some of the solutions that we've got. I want to say the human genome was found in a similar way, yeah. So we'll talk about different types of openness, and this to me is the key for understanding open education. I've been studying it for a few years, and I was very confused because some people say, oh, well, you know, it's really important that the learner has full control over everything that has to do. And some people say, well, we should design the environment so that it enables openness. Some people say open education is the way of the future, and traditional education, higher education, move out of the way because you're becoming extinct, right? And may or may not have credibility, but the issue is if you can't distinguish that, and everybody's open education and everybody's talking about openness, it's hard to distinguish those things. So I was very lucky to find in that same book, Philosophy of Open Education, something from Brian Hill, who I've actually been lucky enough to go back and forth with. He made these distinctions between the types of openness and the intent of openness. So there's procedural, normative, and revolutionary. So procedural openness is probably a more conservative approach, and it's the one that I agree with most because I think it's the most sensible. It's the idea that you take a traditional classroom and you modify the policies and the design decisions and the way that you do things so that the students have access to openness. It enables openness. They can access other things. And so it goes back to these tenets. They have transparency in the classroom and in the structure, the workings. Other people have access to come and participate in the class that wouldn't normally have it. You have ownership over your learning. You have rights to the content and to the materials. And the ability to fork and leave at any time. To me, that's really important, and it's a way that you can modify a traditional classroom so that it's more accessible and you have access to more content and better up-to-date networking resources. One of the biggest things, and this is probably the key to this, is that it enhances educational goals. So you're not just randomly enacting decisions. You're trying to do it for the sake of the learners. You want the learners to have a more effective environment to learn in. So that's procedural openness. A lot of what you see when you hear about open education is more along the lines of normative openness in the next one that we'll talk about. So normative openness is the idea that learners should have full agency over their learning. They should control every task, every element, every sequence. They don't want to do it, they don't have to, there's nobody steering them. The problem with that is that there's instructors and designers have almost no say, so people who actually study how people learn, who actually design education environments so that they're effective, can't say anything about it. So this maybe isn't the best environment for everybody. Doesn't mean it's no good, just not for everybody. It's probably best for autonomous learners and really experienced learners. The way I think about this is the idea that we should be able to operate in a normative environment. We should be able to independently say, okay, I'm interested in these things. These are resources and content that I find relevant. You should be able to learn something from that if it's an environment or a topic that you're experienced in. But that's not something that most people are going to be able to just step into. You really need that procedural openness to teach learners how to stand on their own feet, if you will. The third type is revolutionary openness, and it's the idea that there should be disruptive change. So the new system is going to throw out the old system because it just does things so much better. And a lot of this you'll find is taking place with probably the more popular open education environments. Coursera, edX, Udacity, a lot of these are seeking to replace or substitute the way that we do education. May or may not be a good thing. Something that kind of goes along with this is the work of Paulo Freire, and he talks about structural, like how education can promote a certain type of society and a certain culture in society, and so there may be a bias or an oppression of subclasses so that they're not able to rise to the top in a society. And so this revolutionary openness, some elements of that, you may hear those two things tied together. The idea that education is an oppressive structure. I think that's probably maybe not a twist, but it plays on the idea that education is to some degree intended to socialize you into a community. the things that we teach in school and the way that we teach them are intended to enculturate or bring somebody into being a functional member of society in a given society. So school's necessarily going to be different if the culture's different, which is a whole nother box of worms. But finally, to open educational designs, and this concept map you'll have access to it at my website, which I'll give you. But if you'll notice, there's the open education system, which is a modification of traditional system. And then there's open educational designs. These are the different types of classes. There's 3 major categories that I have, and there's alternate education models, which are the ones that are revolutionary openness. They seek to replace or substitute traditional education structures. And you'll see XMOOCs is basically an institutional MOOC, but Coursera, Udacity, they're under what I call a mass delivery model. They're trying to get 500,000 people to come. That type of environment, they're going to have videos. The student's going to access a computer screen. They're going to watch videos. They might get interrupted with a quiz or something. But there's it's delivery of information, but it's not necessarily instruction. There's open university models where they take, a lot of times they'll videotape a professor's class that's an actual class at MIT or something, videotape it, make the lecture content available. They call that open courseware, but they'll release that, or an open educational resource. And they'll release that, and then these university models will use that. They'll say, well, why shouldn't you have the statistics professor from Yale and the history professor from MIT, and why shouldn't you be able to get the best of the university? So this is an open university model. It's going to be something like that. University of the People and edX are both examples of those. Yes, ma'am.
I just finished a Coursera course, which is actually more like the Open University. It was actually
Really?
an excellent course.
Okay.
And it was modeled exactly on his regular course, and there was
Okay.
a lot of interaction and learning.
Okay, that's good to know. Actually, and I haven't looked into Coursera myself, but other than just cursory. But the reason that I've got these, there is going to be some overlap, and thank you very much for telling me that. The reason that I've got Coursera with these mass delivery models, and I probably should go check it, is that to me an open university model seeks to give a degree or some certification. It's like it's courses rather than just a course, and the courses fit together in some way. And that may be the case with Coursera, and I've just missed it. I was under the impression that Coursera was just a collection of courses at this point, but they weren't necessarily under the same name.
They have both.
I'm sorry? They have both?
Yeah, they
Okay.
have both.
Well, definitely that's something to look into. And this is a work in progress, but I feel like this is pretty close to the way that it is. But there is going to be some overlap. For instance, some of these courses down here are run a lot in the same way as some of these MOOCs. The third category under alternate education models, again, those are the ones that seek to replace or substitute the traditional way of doing things. They're the pedagogy models. And that's the idea of peer teaching. I can teach you, you can teach me, and we can come together and make a class. The topic focus models are probably the most, they were the most common before these XMOOCs, institutional MOOCs came. And they go by normative openness. It's the idea that learners should have full control over their environment, go in and out, access the resources at their own will. And you'll see that, if you've heard of Khan Academy, a lot of people may have, Khan Academy is a completely different structure than a lot of these other MOOCs. The C-MOOCs is what we call them. They work on connectivist principles, and I've got a paper on that. But it's basically the idea that people learn through connections and through sharing with technology. And the idea that some of what you know is distributed on the internet. It's not all in your head, which I do and don't agree with to different extents. I won't get into it here though. But there's well-structured and ill-structured. So ill-structured is there's not really a formal way of doing things. You set your own goals. You set your own schedule. You access the information however you choose. And these are those connectivist MOOCs. They encourage students to form their own groups through their PLEs and to interact with this. The MOOC is a hub, if you think about it, and they have their own little networks out here that interact with that main hub. But the MOOC itself is not the place of learning. It is the aggregation point for many places of learning. You think about it like that. A well-structured course, on the other hand, may operate on similar principles, but it's more structured. There's an idea of you don't have to go through the specific sequence, but there is a preferred or a suggested sequence that you go through the material in. You'll have access to any of the material, but there are goals. There are goals that are at least implied, if not decided for you, but not to the extent that there would be maybe a traditional class. And so Khan Academy is a great place to go. I've got Bonk Open is an open education course that Curtis Bonk, as a big researcher in openness, that he made, and then the MOOC, which is a MOOC is a massively open online course. Probably failed to mention that a few minutes ago. But they're distinguished primarily between connectivist MOOCs that work off of this philosophy of ill-structured, everybody does their own thing, and the institutional MOOC, the X MOOC, which is the idea that, like we have the mass delivery and we have a lot of students, and they're primarily distinguished there. And again, I've got that distinction on my website. The MOOC was a massively open online course that was meant to explore and critique that thought process. The most important thing, the one that I study here, are the traditional education models, and there's an open K-12 school. It's called Utah Open High School. Uses open educational resources. Students access it from home. But what I'm primarily interested in are higher education courses, so anchored open education or anchored open courses. And there's different ones. DS 106, the Stanford AI course technically fit in that model. And so I'll run through these real quick. And okay, I should be able to get through this. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. So open educational designs, again, are an overarching term to refer to all of these things, the three different types that we mentioned. And so just a quick definition, because you've seen through the map. Standard education models, a traditional education model is the primary category. It's a traditional class. And then it's been made open in some way. So the higher education model, the anchored open courses, will have traditional students that are actually registered in an actual university. And then other students who are not registered will have access to that. But the consideration there, the primary concern of the educator, at least to some degree, is those students who are registered. That's the primary concern. And then other people can benefit from it. The difference, again, I kind of went through this, but the topic focus models, again, don't really have a schedule. There's free access to the different resources. And the student should have full agency, which is the distinguishing feature. The student has control. So it goes under normative openness. And then the alternate education models, which they're presented as as an alternative to traditional education. So it's meant to substitute or supplant traditional education in some way, change the way that we do things. Here's just the logos for the different types of open environments, and these on the bottom are the Flickr images that learners involved in that network created and shared through their network. And I've got links to each one of these on this website that I'll share with you in a second. But just overall, and I know it's been a lot, openness is identified by the characteristics and the context that it's in. And there's three elements to open learning environments that are usually different than traditional environments, and that is the instructor, the environment, and the learner. They do different things than you would in a traditional education environment. There's three types of openness, and so that's procedural, normative, and revolutionary, or revolutionary. And so the idea there is that there's three different approaches that have three different impacts on how you design a course. And then there's three categories of open educational designs. Those are the traditional education classes where there's actual students and the world has access to it. And then the topic focus models like the connectivist MOOCs and Khan Academy, where learners can go and just set their own pace. And finally, the Coursera and edX and Udacity. This is my website, and there's a resources tab there that's got the USA Baldwin tab underneath, and I should have an audio of this set to slides in the next few days, but you've got the slides, you've got access to links, you've got my contact information, so please get in touch with me through, it's actually right here, email, Twitter, or the website. And if you guys have any questions or anything, I'd be happy to take them, but I think I'm eating my time.
Thank you,
up.
Fred.
Thank you.
Fred and I were in a statistics class, speaking of online or open learning. We were in a statistics class together, and the professor in that class is a traditional class.